Millions of white Americans belonged to the Klan. And they weren't even embarrassed by it. They were proud of it. And that hate became embedded systematically and systemically in our laws and our culture. We do ourselves no favors by pretending none of this ever happened.
Critical race theory says every white person is a racist. Critical race theory says America is fundamentally racist and irredeemably racist. And let me tell you right now, critical race theory is bigoted, it is a lie, and it is every bit as racist as the Klansmen in white sheets.
President Biden and Senator Ted Cruz weighing in on the latest clash in the culture war, critical race theory. It's an approach to teaching of American history and civics that argues systemic racism is woven into American law and institutions. It's become a flashpoint for conservatives who argue the approach itself is racist, with several states and localities moving to ban critical race theory from curriculums. Here to discuss the issues fueling this heated debate, two top academics, Leah Wright Rigueur, professor of history at Brandeis University, and Glenn Loury, professor of social sciences at Brown University, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Welcome to you both. And Leah, let me begin with you. Lay out the terms of the debate from your perspective first. How would you define critical race theory?
So I think we have to be clear about the definitions. It's really important. And what you're hearing now is a debate supposedly over critical race theory, but that's not actually what we're debating. Critical race theory is, in a lot of ways, just a niche section of academia that deals with kind of using laws, institutions, policies to understand how racism, how inequality, how discrimination has been perpetuated. It's been taught in upper-level seminars, usually third-year electives in law schools, but certainly my children are not learning Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bell, Imani Perry, and the like in their public school educations. The debate that we're having right now is over the study of race, racism, and inequality in history and in public policy, and certainly how those things have been taught throughout history, how they've been understood throughout history, and then how they are part of the larger American story that we tell each other and one another, and including our students.
Glenn, what do conservatives mean by critical race theory? What's their concern, and do you agree with the definition?
I think the definition is fine as far as it goes. I think the concern is about the narrative. It's about what is the story of the American project and where does race fit into that. And I think it's a bit like arguments about how do you teach evolution versus creationism, or what do you do about sex education in the schools, where people are concerned that a certain narrative, a certain view, which is very uncharitable to the American project, and which is buttressed by references to historical mistreatment of African Americans, that is being put forward as the major framework for understanding contemporary issues of racial disparity. So the conservatives who are objecting are saying, no, it's not systemically white supremacist, inherent American failure. There are complex dynamics at work here that account for these disparities.
Is banning critical race theory from curriculums the way to go? Glenn, why don't you start?
Oh, no, I wouldn't do that. No more than I would ban the teaching of Marxism. I mean, I wouldn't ban it. I would argue against it. In other words, I would argue the glass of the American saga with respect to race is half full and more. I would say that if you looked at mid-20th century, the typical occupation for an African-American woman was a domestic servant. This has changed dramatically within my lifetime. I would say that slavery was a fact of human culture everywhere. Emancipation, which happens here in the United States of America en masse, is a uniquely American achievement. Not that slaves were not emancipated elsewhere, but that the implicit promise of the American project culminates for blacks in emancipation and in the civil rights movement. So I would say let's fight over the narrative. Let's not fight over words.
Leah, one of the concerns you hear from conservatives is that progressives don't recognize the kind of progress that Glenn was just talking about. And we most recently, just this week, Juneteenth, finally, perhaps, a national holiday.
Right, and I think this is a wonderful example of the way in which kind of, the idea of teaching racism and the study of inequality in the classroom can actually produce substantive, in this case, legislation. So we do see something emerge out of this. like Juneteenth, right? And we know that Opal Lee, 94-year-old Opal Lee, has been fighting for this for years. And certainly the way that it has been taught is both as one that's complex, that understands the way in which the federal government failed, the way in which the state of Texas and individuals in Texas failed, but also one that is celebratory about the way in which a group of people have persevered, have been deeply resilient. And so part of, I think, what we have to understand here is that the celebratory moment that we have for Juneteenth right now is the kind of thing that people are trying to legislate against, right? The study of that actual Juneteenth, the study of a moment like Tulsa, which we recently kind of commemorated, the 100th anniversary of Tulsa. You don't want to legislate against that. You don't want to ban against that because it'd be legislating against the truth, and it would be legislating against history as it happened.
Glenn, how do we bridge this divide?
Well, I think we should get beyond race. I know I'm spitting in the wind when I say that. I know no one wants to hear it. I think the right story here is that it's the American story. We're all in this thing together. I know that's very easy to say. I think Martin Luther King got it right in 1963. I think that the racialization of this discussion of crime and violence and policing, of poverty and wealth and whatnot, is bad for America. I think talk about reparations, whatever the moral argument might be, is disastrous for the future of this country. Black people should not be trying to cut a separate deal with America. Let's make the country a good country for everybody, and we'll be on the right track.
Take on that, Leah?
Well, I think Glenn is right in citing Martin Luther King Jr., but I'm going to cite him in 1967, where he said, "Where do we go from here? Chaos or community?" And I think one of the things that he pointed out is that we are going to have to get to the root of understanding inequality, and we're going to have to get to the root of understanding racism by actually studying the past and doing an honest and objective job of studying the past. And that means understanding both the national sins, but also understanding the great parts of America and how those things come together, how they haven't benefited everyone in our society and in our country. And in fact, by studying race, racism, inequality, understanding institutions, systems, right, all of those things, we actually aren't just making America a better place for African Americans, although certainly, right, that is the narrative I think people want us to understand or want us to think that is the compelling narrative. But instead, we're making America a better place for everyone. It makes America a freer and more democratic and more inclusive place for all of us.
Glenn, I saw a nod of your head to some of what Leah was saying there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree you don't ban the teaching about the history of the country. I agree with that. As I say, the question here is about the narrative. It's about how we're going to tell the story. There's a lot to agree upon, and I'm so happy to hear the endorsement of Martin Luther King. 67 is fine with me, too. Poor People's Campaign, Riverside Church speaking against the Vietnam War, that's also fine with me. But basically, we are 13% African Americans of a country which is dynamic and is moving in the 21st century with all kinds of forces going on. We need to join hands with our fellow Americans on behalf of improving our circumstances for all of our people. And I don't think that we're getting there with some of the racial rhetoric that I hear coming out of various quarters.
Thank you both for an illuminating discussion. Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.